Might help if I unmute my mic, huh? Hi, everybody. God bless you. Yeah, I don't even know how long I'm going to be on. Um, but I put a link down there if anybody would like to come up and pop in here and see. Yeah, there's my link right there. If anybody wants to come up and talk about Bible versions, you're welcome to drop on up. That's what the discussion is going to be about a little bit this evening. Um, Guys, I got to tell you, when back before I began studying like a theologian or whatever you want to call it, I read the Bible an awful lot. And I owned several different Bibles. And to be quite honest with you, I didn't know there was any difference at all in any of them. I felt like some of them were worded better than others. But I was very naive. I didn't know a thing about any of the early manuscripts or the latter manuscripts or the types of manuscripts that we have, the manuscript text types like the Alexandrian, the Western, the Byzantine. I just didn't know anything from anything. I'm just being honest with you. And I read the Bible all the time. And that there would be times I would be reading the Bible and I would scratch my head after reading something. I'd say, well, I don't remember it being quite worded that way, or I don't remember this being said elsewhere here. And but I would just let it go as like me being uh, pretty unfamiliar with everything, and I would just write it off. Well, later on, as I kept studying the Bible, and I hit into my early 20s, um, I began to notice that yeah, there are different versions of the Bible, and some of them do say different things. And that, well, that kind of mystified me in ways. And then when I remember when the NIV came out, I bought an NIV Bible. I guess I'd heard a lot of bad things about it, and I wanted to see for myself. But I began reading in this NIV Bible, and I know I would go certain places like 1 John 5:7, and it wouldn't include the the passage in the text, or it included the passage in the text, but it made notation down on the bottom in the notes that this passage didn't appear in the oldest and most reliable manuscripts. And I found this stuff out the hard way, guys, when I was in the middle of debating a universalist on whether or not Jesus is God. And I was debating this. I was young and stupid. I didn't have a lot to go on, but I believed the Bible, and I believed 1 John 5:7, a slam dunk verse. And now abides the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. Easy peasy, Japanesey. That's a Trinity. But when I played it out for this universalist, he just said that verse didn't even really exist in the original autographs. And I said, what are you talking about? Well, that's what he was referring to. And NIV says this this passage doesn't appear in the earliest and most reliable manuscripts. So this caused a lot of confusion for me. And I began wondering what all of this is all about. And I started looking into it because I just do that. When I don't just lose my faith and I don't just drop my beliefs, but I look at what's being said there and I give it a chance. And as I began studying the issue out, this was something that I looked into for over a decade. And It was something that I came walking away from feeling absolutely convinced that I understand it all now, at least this aspect of it. Now, a lot of people, because I've taken certain stands, people often misuse my attitude on Bibles per se, just Bibles in general. And many people are going to assume, because of what I'm about to show you guys and the things that I've found here, many people are going to assume I'm a KJV onlyist when I'm not. Many people are going to say that I don't believe you can pick up a Bible and find God in any of them but the KJV, but that's not true. Some people are going to say, well, I don't think, he doesn't think you can find salvation in anything but the KJV, and that's not true either. I believe that an honest person can pick up any Bible and seek God, or seek salvation, and find Him, and find it. I believe that with all my heart. But that doesn't excuse these other versions for also being what I feel is corrupted. And by corrupted, I don't mean that everything that it contains is untrue, but I mean corrupted in the sense that I don't believe it contains all the text. Now, a lot of people have, you guys know what it says. If you've studied this at all, then you know that the scholars, together, well, I say these scholars, but there's scholars that disagree with this. There's scholars that say that the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus are the oldest and most reliable manuscripts out there. There's scholars that say that. Well, they're not being honest with you. They're not being honest with you at all. They're not the oldest, nor are they the most reliable. So, these guys, I don't know why they're trying to cast dispersions on the KJV, except to say that there's always been a war on the Word of God. For as far back as we can go, where God gave us His Word, He gave His Word to Eve, to Adam. And here comes Satan saying, has God said you can't eat of all these trees? So he's always been at war with God's Word, and he's always misapplied it, mislabeled it, misread it, misquoted it. And that's just the way he does. And when we come, well, let me say this. The website that I went to study this, guys, is the codexsinaiticus.org, and this is the home of the. I'm going to get a copy of it here and put it out here for you guys. This is the place. I'll put this down here in. There you go. That link right there will take you to the website for the Codex Sinaiticus, where the scholars that do all of this work on this huge volume, all the work that they have done is compiled on this website right here. And some of the stuff that I'm going to put in here are like two very specific things. Now, let me explain something to you guys. I'm just going to explain some of this stuff off the top of my head. And if anybody wants to come up and talk about it, you can. But just off the top of my head, there's three different kinds of, you can break up the manuscripts into three different text types. You have the Western text type, the Alexandrian text type, and the Byzantine text type. Now, the Byzantine text type is older than the Alexandrian text type, although There are some from that particular text type, the Byzantine text type, that's just a little bit older, all pretty close to the same age. So, but yes, basically, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus predate the Byzantine text types. But then we have other text types too that are called Western. Now, the Western text types, it doesn't refer to any specific language because it involves many different languages. But it is, they call it the Western text type because it contains the fuller text that the later people that defend the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus say that the information was added. Not that Vaticanus and Sinaiticus removed that information. They claim that this was added and it shouldn't have been added. And then they point to older, much more recent manuscripts that didn't contain certain things. And they try to point to those. But if we go to the older manuscripts, because you see, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus aren't the oldest. The Western text type are older, much older. The Western text types, for instance, you have two early Latin versions that predate Jerome. And they date back to the 2nd and 3rd centuries, early 4th centuries. But they go back into the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So these predate the Alexandrian text type. And then you have the Aramaic, also called the Syriac. You've got the Old Syriac and the New Syriac. Okay, but both of them are written in Aramaic. And the Old Syriac predates, it's like 2nd century, 3rd century, and they've probably got some late 1st century stuff in there too. They don't know whether or not they do, but it's possible. But it at least goes back to the 2nd and the 3rd century, which is like 2 centuries newer than the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus. So when they say Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are older, that's just a lie. Now, also, it should be said that the Western text type, it disagrees with the Alexandrian text type. It gives you the fuller version, and that this version, these fuller versions, agree with the other the other Greek texts, because there are other Greek texts. They're not the only texts. Sinaiticus and Vaticanus are not the only Greek texts that existed. There are older Greek texts that are aligned with the Western text types that disagree with the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. So they're not even the oldest Greek. There are older Greek, they're just of the Western text type. That's all. And they disagree. They have the longer versions of everything given here. And then you have the Byzantine, which came after all of the rest of these. And the Byzantine, true to form, gives the longer readings, the longer versions in all of these places that are neglected or left out by the Alexandrian manuscripts. So you have manuscripts all around the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, both before, during, and after, and way before, 2 centuries before them, that they all agree on the longer readings. And the only ones that miss out, that disagree, are the 27 minority texts, and they're called minority texts for a reason, my friend. There's only 27 of them. And they don't even agree together. Like, for instance, Romans 1:16, in the Vaticanus, it leaves out to the Jew first and also to the Greek. But the Sinaiticus includes it. So there you go. I mean, they can't even agree. They don't even agree on the canon that they hold. So there's a lot of disagreements between the two. And they're not the oldest. And we can also prove that they're not also not the most reliable. How can we prove this? Because right here, guys, if you guys click into that Codex Sinaiticus link that I put out there, you're going to see that there's revisions that have been done on that paper, on those codexes. There's places in those codexes that where the ink has disappeared to the point that you have no idea what was there before. And there's places where you can see that they've retraced the old ink. The old ink got weak and they've retraced it. There's places where they did a very poor job. There's places where you can see where they revised it. They completely changed the text that was there before. You can see those places, and they admit that those places are there. As a matter of fact, that they admit that it's been heavily revised, clear up into the 7th century for the Sinaiticus, clear up into the Middle Ages, guys, for the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus. So that makes them neither the oldest nor the most reliable, because the manuscripts that we have down here, that we have backing the Textus Receptus and the King James Version, guys, we didn't do extra work to try to make all of them agree. It's perfectly normal. It's natural. We better have places where they disagree because of the way this thing was done. But you don't disagree on the text. You don't disagree that the original text wasn't there. My goodness, we might disagree on how to interpret it, but that would be about it. Like, you have one scribe that, he's gonna reinterpret. He's gonna translate the Book of Mark, say from Greek to Latin. Okay, that's fine. Well, you get 10 scribes taking that same piece of paper and transcribing it, translating it into Latin. They're going to be choosing different words here and there that say the same thing. Like, do I say forever? Or do I say eternity? Or eternal? Or eternally? Which word am I going to use? It's that sort of thing. But when we get to the differences between the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and the King James Version, let me tell you something. The King James Version is the only modern English version is based on the Textus Receptus and all of these other Western text types that all agree together. The King James is the only Bible that rests on that. All of the rest of these have been translated from the Westcott Hort, which was translated by a couple of occultists who hated Christianity. And they've used the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus. They've used the Alexandrian text type as the backing for their Bible. That's the source of every other Bible out there aside from the King James Version, is the Alexandrian text type. That's why each and every Bible disagrees that 1 John 5:7 should be there. And now abides the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one. But I'm going to read a little something here to you. Here's some of the places where they disagree. 1 John 5:7-8. The King James Version says, there are three that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one. Verse 8 says, and there are three that bear witness in the earth, the Spirit, and the water, and the blood, and these three agree on one. Now, if you go to ESV, verse 7 and 8 is very short and truncated. It simply says, for there are three that testify. Verse 8, the Spirit, the water, and the blood, and these three agree. It completely leaves out the best verse we have in the New Testament describing the Holy Trinity. The Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one in heaven. It leaves out all of that information. Now, when you go to Acts chapter 8, we have the story of Philip and the eunuch. And he, in verse 36, the King James Version says, As they went on their way and came unto certain water, and the eunuch said, See, here's water. What hinders me to be baptized? And Philip said, If you believe with all your heart, thou mayest. And he said, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And he commanded the chariot to stand still, and they went down both to the water, and Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. In the ESV, it totally leaves out the entire gospel message, the confession of the eunuch, and the gospel message of Philip. Here's what it says. And as they were going along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, See, here's water. What prevents me from being baptized? And he commanded the chariot to stop, and they both went down to the water, and Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. So you see, it totally left out where Philip said, If thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Left out that entire part. It leaves out the last half of the last chapter of the book of Mark. It changes. It leaves out the story of the adulterous woman in John chapter 8, John chapter 11, or John chapter 7 and 8. It totally leaves that story out. It leaves out Luke 22, through 43 through 44, the agony of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. It leaves out all of these things, guys. Why is this so different? Now, most scholars would say, well, this stuff was added, and the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus took it out, or took it out. But guys, if all of these other Bibles, the two Latin versions that predated Jerome, and predated Jerome and predated the Alexandrian manuscripts, and the two Aramaic versions that predated the Alexandrian manuscripts, and the ancient Roman documents, and the Roman papyri that all predated the Alexandrian manuscripts, if they all give the same reading, then it's obvious the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus took it out. That's why men like Jerome pitched such a fit when they tried to force him to use the Alexandrian manuscripts in order to make his Latin Vulgate. He protested about 1 John 5:7 in particular. So I think there's abundant evidence that these things existed there before, and they belong there. They belong there afterward. They've earned their spot. So we find things. We find that it gives us information too, like the place where I put up here. I'm going to read it a little bit. He talks about the revisions. They say this consists principally of the C group, correctors who revised the manuscript rather extensively between the 5th and 7th centuries. So you see, it's not a 4th century document. It's still being re-engineered. It's still being revised, is the word that they use. There are correctors who revised the manuscript rather extensively between the 5th and 7th centuries. This is a 7th century document at best, with its revisions. So we read from their own mouths that scribes were writing over the text, changing the text, revising the text at least 2 and possibly 3 times, going through that or at different periods of time, revising those documents at least 2 to 3 times after the 7th century even. So then we find that in other places, we find that the ink is simply faded. In other places, it's completely gone. You'll find a 2.2, and it's titled Ink Loss. It says ink loss on parchment can be caused by a number of reasons related to the ink itself or to external factors such as the nature of the writing support or the mechanical stress which was handling that was suffered. Ink loss on Codex Sinaiticus has been noticed by many scholars in the past, and particular attention has been given to the difference in the permanence of the inks when applied on the hair or on the flesh side of the skin. I think they said it's on the flesh side of the skin where the ink wears off much quicker. In the condition, I'm carrying on now, in the condition assessment of Codex Sinaiticus, the conservators have recorded the type of damage, distinguishing between minor ink loss and major ink loss. Minor ink loss is a partial loss of ink from characters in a text line. Major ink loss occurs when a larger area has nearly completely lost the ink. He goes on to say, the brown-black media of Codex Sinaiticus are affected by ink loss, but the red inks are not, suggesting that the composition of an ink can influence its prominence and resistance to flaking. He goes on to say, large areas of the main text appear to have suffered from ink loss at various stages of the Codex's life, and with various degrees of severity. Sometimes the whole page or large areas of the text columns are affected, resulting in the writing being nearly illegible. This often happens on pages that have been written on the flesh side of the skin. So there you go, guys. They admit that there's, and the admissions go on and on and on. They admit that huge parts of the text are missing and even still missing. And they admit that huge parts of the text have been revised and no longer say what they formerly said. And that a lot of that text that was under that has been missing. So they don't even know what's really missing in some of those cases. They just know that the original text isn't there. And that what was written in were revisions, a lot of revisions, maybe in the second revision or the third revision. So, guys, there's tons of really good information on this stuff. I don't see anybody up here. That's okay. So, at any rate, I'm going to share some of this stuff with you guys on the. I'll pull up a couple of the pages here. Okay, this is the page from the Codex Sinaiticus project. I believe this is the page that I've given you the link to. And I'm going to make that bigger. And there you go. You can see this talks about the revisions. Okay. And it tells us very clearly, this consists principally of the C group correctors who revised the manuscript rather extensively between the 5th and 7th centuries. So, you see, they tell us that they took away 1 John 5:7, Acts chapter 8, and there about the Ethiopian eunuch, the last half of the chapter of Mark, and made all these thousands of other changes. and tried to fool us by telling us that they based this on the minority text, or the 27 texts that the two best ones are Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, who don't agree with each other and who have been written on and revised. They're missing a bunch of the paint even now, and they've been revised several times between the 5th and 7th century, quite extensively by their own words. You see that right here? Rather extensively between the 5th and 7th centuries. It was revised rather extensively. So there you go, guys. This is their words. This is not my words. This is their words. This is what they found out. So we do have the fact that, look it up for yourselves. Google the Western manuscripts. Google it. And Google the papyri, the Greek papyri that exists before the Alexandrian manuscripts. And they're in Greek, just like the Codex Sinaiticus and what have you, Vaticanus. They're as old as they are, in some cases older, and they have the longer reading. The two Latin versions that predate Jerome, my goodness, both of them have the longer reading. The two Aramaic versions that existed before the Alexandrian, they also, guys, date back to like the 2nd, 3rd centuries. So they're older. They're all older, and they all agree on the longer text. They agree that 1 John 5:7 was there. And even if we don't have the entire old Latin Bible, we do have the people that carried those Bibles that quoted their Bibles. Men like Cyprian, who quoted 1 John 5:7. And we have dozens of people that quoted 1 John 5:7 before the Alexandrian manuscripts came out and said that it was not supposed to be there. So, yeah, we know these things are true. And we know that these older versions of the Bible contained the longer text. We do know that. That's what measures the Western text type. That's what distinguishes it from the Alexandrian. It's got the longer reading. So I think this is pretty much a slam dunk case, guys. And as you go on down through this, you see that it said everything that I read to you. Some of the text is unreadable. In some places there's no ink at all. So feel free to ask anything, anytime about this. I don't mind going through it with anybody. And if anybody at all, hey, Stefan, yeah, I think the term Vatican says it all. Vaticanus, yeah. I tend to agree with you on that. I really do. I think that's why it was indeed found there. And I think Origen is the author. So that's another piece of weirdness to all of this. But guys, I'll tell you why I'm not a KJV onlyist, though. Even though I believe these other volumes are corrupted. Yes, I do. I don't believe they're true to the original autographs if they don't include things like 1 John 5:7 and Acts chapter 8 with the Philip and the eunuch there, the adulterous woman, the last half of the book of Mark, last chapter there. Yeah, I believe they are corrupted. Well, that's obvious if it was originally there and they took it out. And they're claiming snow job. That's what it is. But yeah, I have to look at it honestly and say, yeah. But at the very same time, I've got to be honest, guys. I believe that a person can pick up any of these Bibles, and if they're looking for God, I believe they can find him in any of these Bibles. So what Satan meant for confusion and destruction, I think God is going to end up using for the salvation of many. It's because we have some of these in their attempt to drown out the real version, the truest version. With all of these other versions, every single one of them based on this Alexandrian manuscripts, I believe they were trying to drown it out. But people can now read it in a book that they can understand. People are awfully dumbed down today. But now they can find Christ in those pages still, even if it is missing some theological stuff there, like 1 John 5:7, the best Trinity verse in the New Testament. Acts chapter 8, Mark 16. So I'm not a KJV onlyist. I do tell people when they've asked me which version should I read, I try to keep it real simple and not discourage them. I try to say something like, read whichever version you can understand. Just make sure you compare it with the King James Version because it has the longest version. And I leave it at that. So I try not to confuse them, but I try to give them fair warning at the same time. If you run across things that you don't understand, or things that you think confuse you, or things that contradict, check it out in the King James first and see if it brings you to a new understanding. If not, just pray and ask God. And God promised us to ask and we'll receive. And of course, they could always come and talk to me about whatever they're wanting to look into, and I'm happy to try to help them. I'm happy to try not to discourage them at the very same time. So, I am rather adamant. I'm gracious at the same time towards these other versions. I simply make the statement, and I stand on it, that the King James Version, as far as English versions are concerned, the text that it's based on is truest to the original autographs than all of the other Bibles put together, which are all based on the Alexandrian text type, the Vaticanus, and the Sinaiticus. Yes, Stefan makes a really good point. He says the King James Version is not the best version for second language English speakers. I absolutely agree with that. And even some people that only speak English, it's not the best version. Some people have a hard enough time just reading English. That's maybe no reflection on them, but rather maybe their school. I think schools today are abysmal. But, sometimes people need something that's easy to read. The New International Version is easy to read. The ESV is easy to read. There's several versions out there that are. And I advise them, I encourage them, read what you can understand. Read where you get the most out of what you're reading. But just read it along with the King James, and it'll help you get to understand the King James a little better. And you'll also see if the King James has the longer version of what you're reading. And if it does have the longer version, at least you'll know. And you won't have that part left out. You'll understand that. You'll see that. That's how I try to handle that sort of a thing. I think it's pretty important that they should know what's right and what's wrong. So it's a really simple thing to go over here to the Sinaiticus Project website and to stroll through and just read through this stuff. And I'm putting together a bunch of notes in my one of my Facebook groups where I've just got it set up for personal Bible study, and my family's in that group. But I'm working on compiling my notes there on this right now. And when I finally get done with it, I'll probably do a thing on it on YouTube, maybe a video. I'm not going to put a lot of time into production, but I will try to put all the information out there for everybody and make it really easy for everybody and put it in order so that it's easy to follow and understand. I will try to do that, but I'll probably need a little help along the way too. This kind of stuff is interesting, but it's tiring at the same time, especially when you've got other things to do. Wow. The first Afrikaans Bible Stefan I was talking about here, he says it came out in 1933 and it was a nightmare for most Afrikaans speakers. Yeah, I can relate to that, brother. I can relate to that. I'm sorry that it's so hard to. Yeah, that can happen. That's very unfortunate. A lot of times, you've got some very sincere people that maybe aren't very trained very well in theology or trained in even their own language or a foreign language they're trying to interpret from. They've got massive hearts and a lot of desire and all the good, right things that they should do, but sometimes, yeah, if they don't have the qualifications, they can put out a piece that's rather confusing. That's sad. You got to give them an effort for trying, but you got to give them the kudos for trying at least. But yeah, they should have probably sought a little help along the way. That's for sure. And I'm going to put back over there. Okay. I'm going to remove that. There we go. So there you guys are. So there's more that I could say about this, but I don't think I will. This is about 45 minutes long. That's about as long as I really wanted to do this. But I hope that I've given you something to think about. I don't know where you'll stand on this, or if I'll convince anybody that, as I believe, I'm not a KJV onlyist, but I do believe it's superior and that it contains the fuller text. And I don't fall for the stuff where they tell us that all of these Bibles are based on the older, most reliable manuscripts. Like I showed you, their own website proves that they're neither the oldest nor are they the most reliable. And it proves, too, that if you Google the Western manuscripts and the early Greek papyri, the early Syriac, which is Aramaic, and the early Latin, which predates Jerome, you'll find that all these things are true. They predate the Alexandrian manuscripts, and they do have the fuller text. All of these things are facts, and we'll talk about it next time. But I think you'll be rather intrigued if you check these things out for yourselves. And if you run across any questions along the way or need me to verify something for you, just say the word and I'll certainly do my best, guys. But God bless you guys. Love y'all. My wife sends her best too. Y'all have a wonderful evening.